3 days after we buried my son, I transferred control of his $340 million away from his wife. I didn't tell her. I didn't warn her. And for a long time, I wasn't sure I had done the right thing. I still think about that sometimes, sitting in the kitchen of this house where I raised both my boys, with the same ceramic coffee mugs I've owned for 30 years. I think about whether a mother can ever really know when she's protecting her family and when she's just afraid. But then I remember what the DNA results said, and I know I made the right call. My son Nathan was the kind of person who made everything look effortless. He wasn't showy about it. That was the thing people always got wrong about him. They saw the success and assumed he was driven by ambition, by ego, by the need to prove something. But Nathan just genuinely loved solving problems. He used to say that the best puzzles were the ones nobody had bothered to notice yet. He started tinkering with supply chain software during his junior year at the University of Michigan. Not for a class, not for money, just because he thought it was interesting that large hospitals were losing millions of dollars a year on inefficient inventory systems while patients waited for supplies that were sitting in the wrong warehouse. He mapped out the whole system on a whiteboard in the apartment he shared with 2 roommates in Ann Arbor. That whiteboard eventually became ClearPath Systems. By the time Nathan was 32, ClearPath was operating in hospital networks across 14 states. When a major healthcare conglomerate acquired the company, the deal came to $340 million. I remember Nathan calling me from the airport somewhere between Chicago and Denver, his voice completely calm. "Mom," he said, "the number they agreed on is kind of unbelievable." I laughed. "How unbelievable?" he told me. I sat down on the kitchen floor. But money never changed Nathan the way it changes some people. He drove a sensible truck. He kept his same group of friends from college. Every Sunday he called me without fail, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour and a half, depending on what was on his mind. He took care of things quietly. That's just who he was. He met Renata at a hospital fundraiser in Detroit about 2 years after the acquisition. She was in development work for a nonprofit, charming and sharp, and the kind of woman who remembered everyone's name after meeting them once. Nathan mentioned her casually the first few times, which told me more than he probably intended. Nathan only ever mentioned things casually when they mattered to him. I met her about 6 weeks later at a dinner in downtown Detroit. She was warm with me, genuinely curious about my life, asked real questions and actually listened to the answers. I liked her. I want to be honest about that. I liked her very much in the beginning. They were engaged within the year. The wedding was held at a vineyard in the Traverse City area up in northern Michigan, where the lake views made everything look like a painting. I cried. Not because I was sad, because Nathan looked the way every mother hopes her child will look on that day, like he had exactly what he needed. For a while they seemed genuinely happy. But maybe 6 months into the marriage, Nathan said something to me that I carried for a long time afterward without understanding why. We were sitting on the back porch of my house on the Sunday afternoon, October. The maple in the yard had gone completely orange. Nathan was holding a glass of sweet tea and staring out at the yard the way he did sometimes when something was working through his mind. "Mom," he said, "do you think you can ever really know someone's intentions?" I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "I just mean people can behave one way for a long time, and then circumstances change." "Are you talking about Renata?" He didn't answer right away. "I'm talking about people in general." I let it go. I shouldn't have, but I let it go. Then he asked me something else. "If something ever happened to me, would you make sure things were handled right? With the estate, I mean." I told him he was 34 years old and needed to stop talking like that. He didn't smile. "I just need to know you'd step in." "Of course I would," I told him. A few weeks after that conversation, Nathan quietly met with his attorney, a man named Gerald Holt, who had handled the legal work around the ClearPath acquisition. During that meeting, Nathan established a family trust. The trust held $280 million in assets, carefully structured and legally protected. The designated trustee was not his wife. It was me. Gerald called me about the arrangement a few months later after everything had already happened. He told me Nathan had been deliberate and calm throughout the whole process, like a man who had thought something through very carefully and made his peace with it. Less than 8 months after Nathan created that trust, he was gone. He died on a Tuesday morning in February. Black ice on I-75 outside of Flint. His truck slid into a concrete barrier at highway speed. The state police called me at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the clock on the microwave when the phone rang, and I've never looked at that clock the same way since. I will not spend too long on the days that followed. Some things don't belong in words. The funeral was held at a church in our hometown. Nathan's colleagues came from all over the country. His former roommates from Ann Arbor, men in their 30s, now with their own kids, sat in the second pew and wept like they were 22 again. People said all the things people say. Brilliant, generous, one of a kind. Renata sat beside me throughout the service. She held my hand. She spoke beautifully about Nathan during the eulogy, her voice breaking in all the right places. I believed every word she said. Grief has a texture to it, and hers looked real. 4 days after the funeral, Gerald Holt called and asked to meet. When I arrived at his office, Renata was already there, composed despite everything. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at Gerald with the focused attention of someone ready for a business meeting. Gerald explained the trust. He was thorough and careful, the way good attorneys are. When he got to the part about the trustee, Renata's expression shifted. "His mother?" she said. "Yes," Gerald said. Nathan designated Eleanor as the trustee for all assets held within the trust. Renata looked at me. Not with hostility. Not yet. More like she was recalculating something. Why would he structure it that way? I didn't have an answer I was willing to give her in that moment. Gerald continued. The trust had specific conditions governing distribution. Assets could be released to Nathan's legal spouse or, in the event Nathan had a biological child, to that child as the primary beneficiary. Confirmation of biological lineage would be required through independent DNA testing before any distribution could occur. Renata listened carefully to all of this. When Gerald finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she placed one hand flat on the desk and said, "There's something I need to tell both of you." Gerald and I looked at her. "I'm pregnant," she said. The room went very still. She said she had found out just before Nathan's accident. She hadn't told him yet. She'd been waiting for the right moment. Gerald asked the professional questions. Renata answered them. The trust clause about biological heirs was suddenly not hypothetical. It was immediate. I sat in that chair and tried to sort out what I was feeling. Grief was still the loudest thing, but underneath it, something quieter was asking questions I didn't have answers to yet. In the weeks that followed, Renata made her pregnancy very public very quickly. She posted a statement online about Nathan's passing and the child they were expecting. The response was enormous. Tech news outlets picked it up. The story spread the way those stories do now, fast and wide and slightly distorted by the time it reaches most people. I tried to be fair. I tried to tell myself that people grieve differently, that going public was her way of holding on. But I kept thinking about the trust, about the DNA clause, about the fact that Nathan had built those safeguards into the document before any of this had happened. Why? I also started remembering small things. A dinner at their house about 8 months before the accident. The subject of children had come up. Renata had been definitive about it. "We're not there yet," she said. "I have things I want to do first." Nathan had nodded without arguing, which I thought at the time was just him being easygoing. Now I wasn't sure what it meant. I also noticed that Renata never mentioned a due date. When people asked, she said later in the year or sometime in the fall. I had raised 2 children. I knew how pregnant women talked about dates. They counted weeks. They mentioned the exact appointment when they heard the heartbeat. Renata spoke about the pregnancy in broad strokes that never quite landed anywhere specific. About 6 weeks after the funeral, I ran into a woman named Joanna at the dry cleaner near my house. She had worked with Renata at the nonprofit years ago, before Renata transitioned into consulting. We'd met once at a holiday party Nathan and Renata had hosted. We talked for a few minutes, and then Joanna said, with no particular weight to it, "It's funny, isn't it, that Renata's pregnant? She always used to say she was completely sure she didn't want kids." "People change their minds," I said. Joanna nodded. "Oh, absolutely. It just surprised me when I heard." She wasn't suspicious, she was just making conversation. But I carried that conversation home with me and set it down in the same place I'd been setting all the other things that didn't quite fit. I eventually called a private investigator. His name was Roland Sykes. He had done background work for Gerald's firm before on matters related to the ClearPath acquisition. I made the call on a Thursday evening, sitting at the kitchen table with the lights off, and I felt guilty about every second of it, but Nathan had asked me to make sure things were handled right, and I had promised. Roland was thorough and discreet. He came back to me after 2.5 weeks. He had found something. There were travel records showing Renata had made 3 trips to Indianapolis over a period of 4 months before Nathan's accident. The trips weren't connected to any work engagements he could identify. On 2 of those trips, she had met with a man named Calvin Okafor, mid-40s, former business partner in a failed hospitality venture, recently dealing with significant financial pressure. The meetings were at restaurants. The photographs showed them the way people look when they're comfortable together, not the way colleagues look, not the way acquaintances look. Roland was careful. "This doesn't confirm anything definitively," he said. "I know," I said. He slid one more document across the table. It was a summary of Renata's medical records he had obtained through a contact. He pointed to the date of her first confirmed prenatal appointment. Then he pointed to the estimated conception window her physician had recorded. The window didn't align clearly with Nathan's timeline. I drove home that evening and sat in Nathan's old room, the one we'd kept more or less the same since he left for college, and I looked at the framed photo on the shelf of him and his older brother Warren. Warren had died 4 years before Nathan. A pulmonary embolism, sudden and fast, at 39 years old. He was coaching a youth baseball team in Grand Rapids on a Saturday morning and was gone before the ambulance arrived. I had already buried one son before I buried Nathan. I mention that only so you understand what kind of reserves you're drawing on when you decide to keep fighting. The baby came in late September. Renata delivered at Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak. She called me from the maternity ward. I drove there that same evening. When I walked into the room, she looked exhausted and relieved in the way that only new mothers look. The baby was small and pink and absolutely unaware of anything. A boy. She named him Liam. I held him. Of course I held him. And I looked at his face the way you look at a newborn when you're searching for something familiar. I didn't find Nathan there. I kept looking. I couldn't find him. I told myself that meant nothing. Babies don't look like anyone at first. But the question wouldn't leave me. Gerald filed the paperwork to initiate the DNA verification process required by the trust. When Renata received the formal notification, she called me within the hour. "This is an insult," she said. "It's a legal requirement," I told her. "Nathan wrote it himself." "Nathan is gone," she said. "He's not here to explain why he felt the need to put something like that in his own will. But I'm here, and his son is here, and we're real." I understood her anger. Or at least I tried to. But the trust terms weren't something I could set aside because the situation was painful. The DNA testing process took 11 days. Beaumont had a sample from Liam. Gerald's office worked with a lab in Columbus to cross-reference against a DNA sample that had been collected from Nathan years earlier as part of a health screening his company had required for Keyman insurance purposes. 11 days. I did not sleep well during those 11 days. When Gerald called, he asked me to come to his office. His tone told me something before his words did. Renata was already there. Her attorney sat beside her. She looked like she had not slept either. Gerald opened the sealed report from the lab and read the relevant finding aloud. The probability that Nathan Whitaker was the biological father of Liam, 0%. Renata's attorney immediately challenged the methodology. Gerald calmly explained that the trust had required a second independent test in the event of a disputed result. Nathan had written that provision himself. Renata said nothing. She sat very still. Her hands were in her lap. Something in her face had gone quiet in a way that wasn't anger anymore. The second test was arranged at a lab in Pittsburgh with no prior connection to the case. 9 days this time. When those results came back, Gerald again asked us to meet, and this time the results said something none of us expected. Liam was not Nathan's biological son. That was confirmed. But the extended genetic panel, which Nathan had authorized in the trust documents, a provision that allowed the testing lab to cross-reference the child's DNA against broader Thomas, no, Whitaker family markers, returned something that stopped everyone in the room. Liam shared significant genetic markers with the Whitaker family line, not through Nathan, through another Whitaker male. Gerald set the report down. He looked at me. "Ruth," he said, and then he caught himself. "Eleanor, the data indicates that Liam's biological father was a direct male relative of Nathan's. Given the family structure you've described, there is one other candidate. I already knew before he said the name. Warren, my older son. Dead for 4 years, gone on a Saturday morning on a baseball field in Grand Rapids. The room was so quiet I could hear the HVAC system running. Renata covered her mouth with one hand. That's not possible, she whispered. But it was. The science said it was. And suddenly, sitting in that office, I understood something about Renata I had not understood before. Something that recontextualized every conversation, every moment, every expression I had cataloged over the past months. I looked at her directly. "How long did you know Warren?" She didn't answer immediately. "Before Nathan," I said. "How long did you know Warren before you met Nathan?" She exhaled very slowly. "A few years." Gerald leaned forward. "You were in a relationship with Warren Whitaker?" Renata looked down at the folder in front of her. "Yes." The admission settled over the room like a change in weather. She had known Warren first. They had been together. And then Warren died. And years later, she met Nathan. Gerald asked the obvious question next. Then how does this genetic result exist? Warren has been deceased for 4 years. Liam is an infant. Renata was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and deliberate. "When Warren and I were together, we talked about the future, about eventually starting a family. He went through a fertility preservation process. He had a minor health scare, nothing that turned out to be serious, but it was enough to make him want to take precautions. He stored samples at a clinic in Ann Arbor. No one interrupted her. After he died," she continued, "I couldn't bring myself to have them destroyed. It felt like erasing the last piece of him, so I left them there, paid the annual storage fee, didn't think about it very much. And then," Gerald said quietly, "and then I met Nathan." She paused, "and things moved fast, and I thought I had put Warren behind me." Another pause. "But there were moments when I wasn't sure. And about a year into the marriage, I went back to the clinic, not with a plan. I just needed to, I don't know, see that it was still there, that he was still there somehow." Gerald stayed very still. "Did you proceed with the procedure?" "I asked about my options," she said. "The clinic explained what would be involved in using the stored genetic material. I signed some forms. I told myself I was just gathering information. But you scheduled an appointment?" She nodded slowly. "I told myself I would cancel it." "You didn't cancel it." "No." The word fell into the room like a stone into water. "I didn't tell Nathan," she said. "I was barely able to admit it to myself. And then when I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I told myself it might still be Nathan's, that there was still a chance." "There wasn't," Gerald said. "No," she said quietly. "There wasn't." I sat with all of this for a long moment. This woman across from me had known both of my sons, had loved Warren, had married Nathan, had carried a child that belonged to neither the man she married nor the man she had moved on from, but to the ghost of the man she never quite left. It was the strangest grief I had ever encountered. Not straightforward, not clean, not the kind you can be simply angry about. I looked at Liam, asleep in the carrier on the floor beside Renata's chair. He had Warren's ears. I realized now that I was looking for it. That slight forward tilt, Warren had always been self-conscious about it as a teenager. "He has Warren's ears," I said. Renata looked at me. Her eyes filled. "I noticed that too," she said softly. I didn't let myself think about what it meant. Gerald cleared his throat gently. "We need to discuss the trust." The trust. $280 million. Still sitting in an account I was responsible for. The conditions for distribution had not been met in the way anyone had anticipated. Nathan had no biological heir. Renata was not entitled to assets as a spouse under the terms Nathan had specified. which included a clause about full disclosure of material facts, a clause Gerald told me was extremely unusual but entirely enforceable. But there was Liam, Warren's son, my grandson, a child who carried Whitaker blood. Gerald looked at me. As trustee, the distribution decisions rest with you. Within Daniel's, he stopped. Within Nathan's stated framework. I thought about Nathan for a while before I spoke. The way he used to bring dessert to Sunday dinners, blueberry pie from a specific bakery in Ferndale that he claimed was the best in the state, the way he laughed at his own jokes before he finished telling them. And I thought about Warren, coaching those kids in Grand Rapids, still showing up, right until the last morning of his life, both of them gone. And this small boy sleeping in a carrier on Gerald Holt's office floor, who had no idea that the two men whose blood ran in him had both loved him in the only ways they could. Here's what I'm going to do, I said. Renata looked up. The trust will remain intact. It was built to protect what Nathan created, and that's what it will continue to do. She nodded, bracing. A protected sub-account will be established for Liam specifically. The funds will be managed by a board of trustees, not me alone, not Renata, until Liam reaches adulthood. The money will cover his education, his health care, whatever he needs to build a real life. He will receive $120 million when the legal and financial structure is fully in place. Renata's breath caught. That's nearly half. It's what's right, I said. He's a Whitaker. That's not his fault or his choice, it's just what he is. I paused before the next part. Renata. She met my eyes. You will not have direct access to the trust funds. Not now, not later. The money is for Liam, and it will be structured so that it only reaches him. You will receive a reasonable annual support payment for his upbringing, reviewed every 3 years. If at any point those funds are misused, the arrangement ends. She nodded. She didn't argue. Maybe she understood she had no ground to argue from. The rest of the trust, I said, will be directed toward a foundation in Nathan's name, focused on supply chain innovation in healthcare, what he actually built, what he actually cared about. Gerald wrote notes without stopping. Renata looked down at Liam for a long time. When she looked up again, her eyes were wet. I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything, she said. But will you be in his life? Will you be his grandmother? I looked at that little boy. Warren's ears. Nathan's family. My blood. Yes, I said. I will. I drove home the long way that evening, through the old neighborhood where my boys had grown up, past the park with the broken swing set that was always broken and somehow never fixed, past the high school where Warren had played outfield and Nathan had done the morning announcements with way too much enthusiasm. I thought about what it means to be the last one holding something together. Families are not simple. They never were. People make choices in the middle of grief and fear that they would never make otherwise. Renata had loved my son Warren in a way she never fully let go of. That love became a secret, and the secret became something that could have destroyed everything Nathan built. But I don't think love itself is the problem. I think we all at some point make the mistake of trying to hold on to someone in the wrong way, past the point when letting go was the braver thing. Nathan built the trust because he sensed something he couldn't name. He put those DNA provisions in because he believed, on some quiet level, that the truth should always have a path to the surface. He was right. And now Warren has a son who will grow up knowing his grandmother, knowing the Whitaker name, knowing something about where he came from, even if the full story is complicated. It's not the ending I would have chosen, but it's an honest one. If you'd been sitting across from me in that office, what would you have done? Would you have made the same choice? I'd really like to know. Leave me your thoughts in the comments, and if this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Stories like this one remind us that families are messy and imperfect, and sometimes that's exactly where love survives anyway. Thank you for being here with me. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately, not in any grand philosophical way. Just the quiet, practical kind of thinking you do when you're older and you've watched enough of your own life unfold to see how one choice pulls the next one forward like a thread. Renata made a series of choices. None of them were simple, and I don't think any of them were made without real feeling behind them. She loved Warren. That part I believe completely. And when he died, she didn't know what to do with that love, so she carried it the wrong way, past the point when carrying it was still honest. She met Nathan, she built a life with him. And all the while, something unresolved was sitting in a clinic in Ann Arbor, waiting. The thing about unresolved things is that they don't wait quietly forever. They have a way of surfacing, one way or another, not because the universe is punishing anyone, just because that's how reality works. Truth has weight. Eventually, weight wins. Nathan knew something was off. He couldn't name it. He never said it directly to me, not in those words. But he built those safeguards into the trust because some part of him understood that clarity mattered more than comfort. That was his intelligence at work, not suspicion, not cruelty, just the same careful thinking that built ClearPath from a whiteboard in Ann Arbor into something that changed how hospitals operated across 14 states. He applied that same precision to protecting what he had built. And that precision is exactly what brought the truth to light after he was gone. I think about the difference between intelligence and wisdom sometimes, and I think Nathan had both in ways I didn't fully appreciate until after I lost him. Intelligence is knowing how to solve a problem. Wisdom is knowing which problems are worth solving before they become crises. Nathan was wise enough to prepare for a situation he hoped would never come. That preparation cost him nothing in his lifetime. It cost me nothing except 11 days of broken sleep, but it meant that Liam, a child who had no hand in any of this, will grow up with real security and a real connection to the family he actually came from. That's the part I keep coming back to. Liam is innocent. He is a Whittaker. He has Warren's ears and, I suspect, Warren's stubbornness, which will either serve him extremely well or give his mother a genuinely difficult adolescence. Either way, he deserves the full weight of what this family built. Not because of what Renata did or didn't do, simply because of who he is. The hardest thing about living with integrity is that it doesn't always feel good in the moment. Pushing for the DNA test felt cruel when a grieving woman was sitting across from me holding a newborn. Refusing to release the trust funds felt cold when the headlines were calling me controlling and heartless. Integrity rarely announces itself with applause. It usually just sits there quietly, asking you to keep going anyway. What I've learned, not from this story alone, but from 60-some years of being alive in this particular life, is that the people who do the right thing under pressure are usually the people who decided in advance what they stood for. Nathan decided. He wrote it into a legal document before anything went wrong. I decided the day I made him that promise on the back porch. We both held to it when holding to it was hard. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. Not some lesson about money or inheritance or family drama, just this. Decide what you stand for before you need to stand for it. Because when the moment comes, and it always comes, there won't be time to figure it out from scratch. Liam will know his grandmother. He will know the Whittaker name, and someday, when he is old enough, he will know the full story of how he came into the world and what people chose to do about it. I hope it teaches him something useful.